Hello and welcome to Campus Guard ScriptSafe live demo. My name is Kathy Staples and I am the marketing manager at Campus Guard. We also have Ginger Staples, Campus Guard marketing specialist, to monitor your questions. We are recording today's webinar, so look for an email with a link to the recording in the next couple of days. If you have any questions, please enter them into the chat and we will answer as many as we can following the live demo. We want your feedback about today's content, so please complete our brief survey after the event has ended. Today, we're diving into the ScriptSafe platform powered by Source Defense, which helps your institution meet PCI DSS requirements 6.4.3 and 11.6.1, protects sensitive data at the point of input, and automatically monitors, controls, and blocks unauthorized script behavior in real time. Let's get started by introducing today's presenter. Matt McGurk is the Senior Director, Global Head of Field Engineering for Source Defense. Matt is an expert in JavaScript, web technology, client-side risk, and client-side security. He has over 15 years of experience in web application development, website administration, and web app security. He served as a consultant and analyst to Fortune 50 companies on how best to secure their customer-facing web properties and business-critical web applications. Matt lives in New Haven, Connecticut with his wife and 2 dogs. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Matt.
Thank you so very much. Thanks to our audience for joining us today. As was mentioned, my name is Matt McGurk. Let's talk about format or kind of agenda here. I'm going to walk through a brief kind of problem statement and describe, why are these new requirements in the payment card industry data security standard? What's the practical threat to our web applications, and why has this been mandated for us to solve? I'll talk about the requirements themselves and how one would approach meeting them as an organization that's in scope. And I'll also talk about what Source Defense does to power the ScriptSafe platform, how we solve this and have been solving it for nearly a decade now, and how we might be of use to you. So let me get my screen share back up here so we can hop into it. And as Kathy mentioned, if you do have any questions over the course of the session, just feel free to throw them in the chat, or rather the Q&A section. I'm happy to take those. We'll have a section at the end where I go through those and we answer them live. So I really encourage you to take a look at that and, participate. That's the best way to get the most out of the session. So let's start.
Do you want me to launch the poll real quick?
Yeah, that'd be great. Please do. So we're gonna have a brief poll, just kind of letting me know what all of your familiarity is with the topic. That'll help me kind of tune our presentation here. So please just let us know how familiar you are with these items. That's PCI DSS requirements 6.4.3 and 11.6.1. You can put in your own familiarity there and let us know where you're at on your journey. As mentioned, Campus Guard is working with our organization Source Defense to help power the ScriptSafe solution and solve this problem for higher education. Source Defense as an organization has been around for nearly a decade now. I've been here for about 7 years of that decade. We were founded to solve these problems in specific. So handling security issues with the code inside of web pages as visitors interact with a website. That's all we do. It's the majority of our work and our effort, and we think we do a pretty good job of it. Hence, Campus Guard choosing us as a partner to solve this in the higher ed space. The root cause of this issue is the technology known as JavaScript. And by the way, just as kind of expectation setting, you don't need any particular subject matter expertise to follow today's session. This should be generally accessible. I think anybody who's kind of familiar with a web browser and that sort of thing should walk away with what they need to know. So just when I throw the words JavaScript on the screen, I don't want anyone to kind of get scared by this. It should be pretty palatable, I hope, knock on wood. So JavaScript is the programming language, the coding language that makes all of our web pages on the internet literally interactive. It handles everything within a web page from, animation to what happens when you click a button to much more advanced things like, you can run Photoshop inside of a web browser here in 2025. So the root cause of this is that JavaScript has no native security controls. The language inside the browser, the way the browser deals with it, it just gets to do whatever it wants, no matter where it came from, meaning what part of the internet is served from, or what it's supposed to do, like its purpose, its origin or purpose. In the security world, or more generally, you may have heard several different terms for this kind of attack that leverages that problem in JavaScript. You may have seen the term mage cart. That's kind of the at this point, old school security moniker for it. It's a combination of the words Magento, which is an e-shopping, or rather e-commerce platform, and shopping cart. So the Magento e-commerce shopping cart was the very first, at least identified one of these attacks, as well as kind of a landmark in the area. The other terms, e-skimming, that's what PCI DSS uses, form jacking, click jacking, credential harvesting, crypto jacking. These are all the same flavor of attack. And over the years, the industry has kind of settled on the term client-side security, meaning the client side of a web application. So rather than the server side, our databases, our application servers, all that stuff, we're talking about the code inside of the web page as the visitor is interacting with your websites. There's a lot of that code that loads into the browser. I'll show you a practical example of this in just a minute, but the idea is that a modern web application, like I said, is not just kind of a page out of a magazine like it was 20 years ago, 25 years ago, where you look at it and there's some images and there's some text and then that's it. It is much more akin, it literally is a full-blown application that runs in the browser. Now, there's a lot of code that comes from your own organization, meaning that the university or otherwise the org writes it themselves or integrates open source stuff into their own applications or et cetera. That's called first-party JavaScript in this particular realm. And so you see some examples of that here: React, jQuery, it's Angular, et cetera. So that's first-party JavaScript. The other category of this stuff is called third-party JavaScript. And you can see here some examples: Twitter, I guess X now, Facebook, et cetera. So this is types of code. This is code that's loaded on the fly at the request of the web page from other parts of the internet. Meaning when you build a web page, you literally kind of say, hey, browser, go grab the latest version of the Facebook Connect library and load it into the browser. And so as you can kind of probably guess, that turns into a pretty significant supply chain issue, because you get cases like this where the web page is calling in different sets of code from different parts of the internet. And it's not that you can't index some of this stuff. Like you can't, if you're an owner of a web page, you can understand where your third parties are coming from, because ostensibly you have contracts with these folks. Someone made the decision at your organization to install these, et cetera, et cetera. The issue is that this code, this third-party code, can load its own stuff on the fly. So you get examples where tools like Outbrain or other marketing tools, or even sometimes real-time user monitoring tools, I've seen this with Microsoft Clarity and a few of the others, is fourth and fifth and sixth party scripts, which is represented by the further right side of this chain, which is literally, like I said, loaded in real time dynamically. So you get a supply chain effect, but unlike a traditional supply chain where we're concerned with, the firmware in our routers or what version of log4j is in the, anyway, so rather than that, this is happening in real time out in browser land, which makes it a particularly difficult type of problem to solve. So then let's talk about the mechanics of an attack. In the middle of my screen here, I have a small browser icon. This represents literally a visitor to your website as they're going through their session. So the browser and server talk to each other. And this is just a normal thing that happens, thousands of times per second on a given website, depending on what's going on. In the middle here, you've got what I would call a traditional cybersecurity, web security stack. You're going to have things like a firewall, a web application firewall, TLS, SSL, bot mitigations, all sorts of other stuff in here. This is in this slide really to illustrate that these do not solve the problem. These solve problems of other things coming in to your server, people looking for backdoors or unpatched exploits or whatever. That's what a firewall would solve for. They do nothing about the code inside the browser at runtime. As your web page begins to load inside of the visitor's web browser, it will load your own first-party code. It also loads third-party and fourth and fifth, sixth, et cetera, party JavaScript. All of this code loads into the browser, and like I said, irrespective of its origin or purpose, it can and does do whatever it wants to inside of the web page, from changing the look and feel of the web page to interacting with data to opening connections to other parts of the internet. Any tool, so to speak, any capability that is available to legitimately acting code is available to any code at all. And so attackers know this, and as a result, they will take a couple different paths to get into the web page. One of the most common and most difficult to solve for versions of this is a supply chain attack, wherein the attacker chooses to get some weaker link down the chain. So maybe they don't want to get into your own web application because it's one target and it's relatively well hardened, but they do want to get to it or to the web pages. And so they'll exploit some part of the supply chain, because if I'm an attacker, not only do I get this, but I get every single other client that's involved in this, every other person who uses that particular tool, or so on and so forth. So that's one form of it. The other form, like I kind of mentioned in passing there, would be a first-party attack where your own infrastructure is compromised, and then the attacker delivers malicious code into the browser that way. So they change your own code, and then it ends up there, because, like I said, the theft of data is so much easier once you get out into the browser. Exactly like I just said, the most common consequence of this is that the attacker steals data. So they just skim off the credit card numbers as they're typed into a form. They introduce their own form into the page to take those, et cetera. But kind of all roads in this lead to profit for the attacker. So taking that sensitive information is very valuable to them. You also see stuff like brand damage, mean like attacks that are literally for the sake of defacing a web property and spreading a political or otherwise message of some kind. You could see something like a ransomware attack take place in this, where the attacker just takes over control of what the web page looks and feels like for the purposes of leverage, I guess. So point being is that it's a widespread problem, and it is very popular, I guess is the word I want to use, because of the effects of it. So what I want to do now is show you a quick practical example of this. And what I'm going to do is simulate an attack here on the New York Times Review of Books site. So to be clear, I'm not actually attacking the New York Times. I haven't done anything to their web application or their web pages. What I've done is kind of under the hood manipulate the traffic to and from my web browser. And what I've done with that manipulation is basically change some of this code. So what I did here was just open up the dev tools, the developer tools in Google Chrome. The only thing I want to show you here, the only point I'm trying to make with this list is, basically, look at all this stuff. So when I hit the New York Times website, I'm getting 44 different pieces of JavaScript that load into my web browser. Some of this is from the New York Times itself. As you can see here, that's first-party code in those definitions I mentioned before. There's also a huge amount of third-party code here. Brand metrics, some Google stuff, GeoEdge, security scorecards in there doing their thing, or maybe scorecard research. That's not security scorecard, but nonetheless, tons of JavaScript. So this is the problem statement, really. If this were a payment page, the goal for the Times to be compliant would be to, well, I'll talk about exactly what they would have to do, but to deal with this code, basically. I'll talk about the specific requirements in a moment. The demonstration I'll show you basically assumes that one piece of this code has been manipulated to, for bad purposes. So what I'm going to do here is click on the login button on the Times website. I'm going to split my screen here so we can see it kind of side by side. So what I've got here now is the client-side attack that has sprung into action, and then the user experience normally over here on the left. So a couple notes here. Of course, these attacks do not have a scary terminal window that shows up when they are in progress. I do this for the sake of demonstration so we can see something happening, because normally these attacks are invisible, right? There's literally no evidence to the eyes or even to forensic tools sometimes that this is happening. And so let's get into this. So as I begin to interact with the Times website here on the left, you can see that the malicious code has no challenge whatsoever grabbing the data that I'm typing into the form. The second thing that I'll ask you to notice is when I click this continue button, the web application spits out this new form. So this is not part of the normal New York Times login workflow. This is something that the malicious script has injected into the page to get information that the visitor would not normally type in at this point in the web application. So they're literally kind of just asking for information a la carte to satisfy their own ends. So the reason I'm pointing this out is there's a few reasons. First of all, is to illustrate that it can change the web page, what it looks like, what it does, point. The second is specific to DSS in that I think a lot of the folks on the phone may be thinking about iframes and how that plays into this and how their payment service provider plays into it and a few other things. Briefly, a payment service provider, a payment gateway will often provide you guys with a form that you embed into a web page using something called an inline frame, an iframe. And under PCI DSS 3.2, that really pretty significantly reduced the scope for a lot of organizations. Under PCI DSS 4.0, that scope has increased to include the page into which the iframe is embedded. So on a technical level, that iframe is literally a different web page. It's like a different browser tab that's just stuck into the web page that you're looking at. So why did I go on that tangent about iframes? The reason I did that was because one of the more popular ways of stealing credit card numbers is what's called a double entry attack, where the attacker doesn't need to figure out some fancy way to get into that payment form that's embedded in the iframe. All they need to do is add their own form, just like this, to the page, get the visitor to enter their credit card number once, have them click a button and the transaction fails, and then show the legitimate payment form again. And then the visitor can enter their number and continue about their business. So here in my demonstration with the login, I click log in, and then in this case, I throw to an error message because I don't want to actually interact with the New York Times web app in any way. But you can imagine in a true double entry attack, the attacker can then, just allow the visitor to continue their transaction and complete their transaction. And then the attacker's got the card number and the visitor doesn't know anything happened, nor does the payment service provider or the hosting institution. So the reason I pointed that out is this is why iframes are not a complete solution to this problem and why DSS has been amended, because of this kind of attack where forms are replaced and changed, or UX and look and feel. And attackers know that and they do it. So that's the attack and the problem statement and how it occurs, or at least one version of it. So moving forward, we're going to talk about PCI DSS. PCI DSS, as I mentioned, about 2 years ago, I don't know, 2.5 years ago, went from 3.2 to PCI DSS 4.0, at least in draft. It went through various kind of revisions and approvals and all sorts of processes over that period of time, and now is fully, I believe, every single requirement is no longer best practice in there. They're all mandatory. So 6.4.3 and 11.6.1 are two new requirements. They're net new to 4.0, and they deal with this specific problem that I illustrated, e-skimming, mage card attacks, client-side attacks. The two requirements are pretty straightforward. They're about, I don't know, maybe 250, 500 words altogether. And they deal with basically the code inside of those web pages and what your mandate is to make sure that code's secure. I boiled this stuff all the way down into about 4, maybe 5 points when you kind of strip out all the extra language. I shouldn't say extra, all the additional clarifying language. So just boiling it down to brass tacks, you get to 1, you have to inventory any payment page scripts. So any scripts that are loaded into a page where a card number kind of appears or is entered, including those in pages where an iframe is embedded. You have to make sure that those scripts are authorized to be there and provide a written justification for each script. And basically what that means is exactly what it sounds like. You have to have someone go through all those scripts, make sure that they're supposed to be there, that you know that they're there, and write down why they're there. This maybe seem kind of like I don't know, not superficial, but like basic, and it kind of is. I mean, it's like this is the first year these are required now rather than just best practice, and this is the foundational work that everybody needs to do to get the rest of it under control. You may have already done this, it may be a part of your process or et cetera, but that is the first step towards the rest of it. You also must implement a method to assure the integrity of payment page script security. And in case you're curious, the words integrity here, DSS is using the specific NIST definition of integrity. So why I'm going into this right now is in the guidance for this 643. The DSS also mentions a couple of technologies called CSP and SRI, content security policy and sub-resource integrity. They are mentioned alongside the other guidance is a proprietary, let's say, third-party tag management system meant to prevent the execution of malicious code. So that's where the ScriptSafe solution would fall into that third bullet. But nonetheless, DSS and the Security Council decided to put the word integrity here, right next to the word sub-resource integrity on the right. And as a result, I think that's led to a lot of confusion. You don't have to use, nor would I frankly recommend that you use sub-resource integrity to solve this problem. The two words are next to each other, but they are not identical. In this case, it's the NIST definition, when what that means is you have to make sure it's coming from a non-repudiatable source. It kind of doesn't change without you knowing about it, and a few other things. I don't have that one memorized, sorry, but just pointing out you can do things that are not sub-resource integrity to assure the integrity of your payment page scripts while we're here. Then in 11.6.1, which is the cousin basically to 6.4.3 and 6.4.3, 11.6.1 says that you must monitor the HTTP response headers. For anyone who's not intimately familiar with the hypertext transfer protocol, what that means is that every web page has metadata that is served along with it that your browser receives when you visit a website. We as visitors don't see that stuff. It doesn't show up in any visible way to us, but the browser uses that metadata to interpret the page content, and that can include security settings. So it's important that you monitor those in case they change, as that could indicate either just a degradation, like somebody makes a mistake configuring, or an indicator of compromise, if the attacker has literally removed some part of your web app and changed that metadata. You also have to monitor the payment page script contents, meaning that you have to know when they change, just kind of a counterpart to the integrity assurance aspect. 11.6.1 is the only part of any of this where frequency is mentioned, like how often you must do these things. They say that you have to monitor the headers and the script contents at least weekly, or at least 7 days. In 4.0.1, they changed from weekly to 7 days or back and forth. So consult your most recent revision. But nonetheless, about a week. Everywhere else are things like promptly and as soon as possible, and et cetera. And it's going to be determined by your TRA, your targeted risk assessment. But nonetheless, the brass tacks minimum for any of this is once a week, although certainly more frequent is advisable, as that seems a little long, in my opinion. To put all that together, merchants and service providers must inventory all payment page scripts, provide that written justification, implement a mechanism to verify and assure the integrity of payment page scripts, and then the headers and the script contents must also be monitored. So those are the things you have to do. The ways that DSS mentions let me talk about CSP and SRI for a moment, just so that those are defined. They're literally right next to these things in the data security standard in the best guidance, or not best practice or guidance. And so I think it's worth talking about what they are. Content security policy, CSP, that is a technology that instructs the web browser on what locations are to be trusted, like where code can be loaded from. So you literally load a list of URLs into your web application, and that then is interpreted by the browser and determines where code is allowed to come from. So I mean, if I was doing that for this website or for any website, my work would be to go through this list, figure out where all these scripts came from, figure out what they do to a certain extent, and write that down and put it somewhere on my web server. And then the browser will consult that list when the page is loading and only load scripts from the content security policy directives. And so that's basically a blacklisting, whitelisting approach. There's a little bit more kind of where can scripts talk to in it, but there's no real behavioral or kind of granular security control available in CSP. So that's the first thing they mentioned. The second thing that DSS mentioned is sub-resource integrity. So sub-resource integrity is a way of instructing the web browser about what a known good version of the script file is. It's a hashing technique. So what you would do is feed all of these scripts into a hashing algorithm. So, SHA-256 or something. It would spit out a fingerprint. And then again, you would put that on your web server somewhere, and then the browser checks that hash at runtime. It goes and it grabs this file, and it looks at the contents of the file and figures out if the hash for that file, or one that actually loads, if the hash for this file matches the known good hash. And if it doesn't, then the file doesn't load. And if it does, then it does. So that's the idea. I've said it many times now, but it's a hashing technique. So you put those two things together, and that's a proposed solution to 6.4.3 and 11.6.1. The challenges with that, as I've seen over the years, are that, I mean, it may be apparent on the face of it, like there's a lot of code here, and it's coming from a lot of different parts of the internet. And as we saw before with the supply chain effect, you may not even have a complete inventory of this stuff, nor is it necessarily even kind of possible to derive that inventory because it could change literally at each page load as these third parties shift in and out their fourth and fifth and sixth parties. So the supply chain part of it makes CSP very difficult to deal with this because you basically have to like assign an FTE or two to staying on top of this, a full-time employee or two to staying on top of this. The second thing of note is that with SRI, like I said, you have to generate file hashes. You have to say, here's a fingerprint for this file. How do you do that with a file like this one, for instance, from Google Ad Syndication? That, well, if you were paying very close attention here, it looks like it bakes a user token into the file name. Like when the browser asks the server for the file, it changes the file. So how do you hash something that changes all the time? You can't. And if the consequence of either of these technologies block the script is that it doesn't load, which can often impact the functionality of the site and what it does, and et cetera, et cetera. So those solutions, sometimes I call them CSP and SRI. Sometimes I call them well-intentioned technologies. Like they're not, no one was aiming to design something that didn't work when the World Web Consortium put them together. They're just not the right tool for the job in this case. If you own the world's simplest web application, if you have like a time clock thing that people punch in and out of, and it's 10 files of PHP or something, and you own the infrastructure and you own how often it's released and everything else, CSP and SRI might be the solution for you. If you have anything even remotely like this, CSP and SRI are going to turn into a quagmire. More often than not, what I see is people kind of going down the road of starting to do this, and then 6 months later, it's a project that didn't go well. The other two notes on this: CSP, part of DSS says you do have to report out on what's going on in the browser. You have to have a way to log that stuff and show up in all the good logging stuff that's in DSS. CSP in and of itself doesn't have any logging mechanism. You have to just like bring your own. There's an API that the browser will spit out messages into, but there's no like reporting mechanism in it. You have to build your own, literally. And then the last note is often what we see with CSP is that it gets so difficult to implement that it ends up just being put out with a wild card. What I mean by that is like, it just becomes so broad, like what's permitted is that everything ends up being permitted. So then if you're doing like a security scan or something, you can say, yeah, I've got CSP implemented, but it doesn't actually do anything. It's like installing a deadbolt, but not having a cylinder installed in it, or et cetera. So what I want to do now is we'll pivot over a little bit. So the third bullet in that guidance, like I mentioned, is a proprietary, like commercial off-the-shelf solution that can handle this. That's what ScriptSafe is. And it's powered by Source Defense. So we ourselves provide a software as a service solution to handle this. Like I mentioned, this is all we do. All of our technology has been developed to solve the underlying problem. And so as a result, like one way to think of it, I suppose, let me just blank this out while we speak here. One way to think about this is that our customers who we started working with like 5 years ago were compliant before these requirements were written. They had been compliant out of the box because we solved the thing that we solved the problem. What you're seeing on the screen here is one particular dashboard in our platform that's dedicated to DSS requirements 643 and 1161. You can see we literally call them out by number down here. So we'll handle that. Well, first of all, inventory. We'll find all of your scripts on your site automatically. We'll classify them into the services that they make up. So you're not looking at actual script files here. You don't have to. We're going to tell you what those scripts are, and we'll also do things like map out their relationships to one another. So you can see here a web application that's pretty heavily integrated with marketing. This is actually sourcedefense.com. If you're curious, this is our own marketing site and all the tech that loads into it. Inventory is handled in any number of different ways and is automatic. Like within an hour of us being deployed, all this stuff is populated and good to go. The second thing that we do is analyze the behavior of scripts. So you can see at a glance here what scripts are interacting with personally identifiable information or talking to another part of the internet or setting cookies. So when you talk about integrity assurance in DSS, this is how we handle that. We do it through behavioral analysis and baselining and alerting rather than that hashing technique I was talking about. And I'll talk more about that in just one second, but it's an important idea to arrive at. We also combine those behaviors into events. So when they change in a significant way, the system will automatically create the relevantly severe critical event and report it out of the system. These can be handled, the alerting can be handled via email or via integration into another system like a SIM, posting stuff to Slack if you want, a myriad of different ways of getting that done out of the system. So you don't necessarily need to log in unless it's important. We monitor the payment page headers as well, of course. We collect we collect all the headers, and then we work with the security affecting headers, which is the language from DSS, because there can be dozens of headers involved in a web page, and not all of them are interesting or important. And so we take care of that for you, that narrowing. Let's zip into a script detail and talk about that briefly. So the way that we handle integrity assurance, as I mentioned, is by giving you tools to decide how you want scripts to behave and how you want to be alerted to that behavior changing. So what I can do in this interface is click in here, drill in and see the specifics of any behavior. For instance, I zoomed in here into a marketing script called HubSpot. That marketing script is interacting with what looks like marketing data to me. It is accessing certain kinds of other data, and it's transferring that to various parts of the internet. And so if all this is okay with me, what I can do here is acknowledge these behaviors. And what that will do is train source defense that that the script is behaving how I want it to, and that I don't need to be alerted to these things in the future. So the integrity assurance loop then becomes, okay, acknowledge script behaviors. If and when they change, you'll receive an alert, come back in, review it, re-acknowledge it, and then you know what's going on with your web app and your payment pages. The other thing we can do is actively manage what code does as it executes inside your visitor's web browser. So for instance, here's a tool called Clickagy Pixel. It is another marketing tool. What we could do here is actually manage what kind of access it has to the data inside of the web page. So as this script is running inside of a visitor's browser, source defense is ensuring that it can never get to card data. We are actively redacting any card information if and when that script tries to access it. So whether that's a malicious thing or it's just a misconfiguration. You see these marketing scripts a lot, just kind of suck up every single form field that's on a given web page. And so misconfiguration is a huge part of this too. And by the way, we've been talking exclusively about PCI in this webinar as advertised, but I would also mention that there is certainly applicability under HIPAA. The Office of Civil Rights out of Health and Human Services published a bulletin about this 2 years ago, talking about things like metapixel on, find a doctor web pages and et cetera. So just a footnote there for anyone who's got HIPAA scope as well. And then also, let's see, FERPA, most likely. To be honest, I haven't seen any legal action around that or et cetera, but I think you could make a pretty decent case for educational records if you've got marketing tech near any kind of student record. I think you could be concerned about that if you don't have other things to be concerned with. Justifications, while we're here, lives in this interface, and you can automatically generate these in our platform too. So once I do that and click authorize and justify, that script is authorized and justified. And so to recap, we talked about integrity assurance here. We talked about justification, obviously that inventory as well we talked about. And then the headers as well I touched on as we went. So that's the source defense solution to approaching this matter. We consolidate all that stuff down into this singular dashboard so I can see at a glance what I need to do to be compliant. I've got, let's see, 6 more scripts to justify. I click this button. Here's all the stuff I got to justify. I click through here. I generate my justifications and enter them. And then now I've got 5 instead of 6. That kind of workflow means that our system is very light touch. I think on average, our customers are spending like 1 to 5 hours per month interacting with this dashboard. And then, of course, at the end of the process, you can export all of the reporting you need from this. This will literally spit out a zip archive of all the reports that we've developed in concert with former QSAs, et cetera, to make sure it meets, what they're looking for in terms of evidence. So the goal is spend as much time in here as is possible. Once you're done with that, you should have to spend no time generating evidence, or give the QSA read-only access to this dashboard if you like. So this is our approach to it. This is if you're evaluating solutions and looking at stuff, this is what I would expect to see in like a commercial off-the-shelf solution. I guess briefly, since we're here and the technical folks may be curious, the source defense deployment looks like this. We ourselves are a couple script tags. We're part of the web page, the payment page that we're meant to help with. This is literally a copy and paste job. To remove all technicals from it, our teams, in concert with Campus Guard, generate this text file, send it to your web developers. That developer copies and pastes it into the right part of the web app, and you're done. There's no further baseline, learning period or network configuration, or certainly nothing like a server-side appliance. It's just some text that goes in a web page, and then we can be of use. And so that's source defense, and that is also my presentation in large. So we're going to open it up for Q&A now. We'll just pause here and see if anything has accumulated over the course of our session. But anything at all on your mind, I am an open book.
Okay, Ginger, do we have any questions? If you have any questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat as well.
I do have one question here. So this is a really good one. Do I need to manage just the payment pages on your site, on the person's site, or the entire website?
Sure. So that's basically scope, right? So you do need to meet DSS, you have to manage the scripts inside of your payment pages. And that includes, like I said before, a page where a payment form is embedded. If you have a redirect or some other stuff, you probably need to manage that page as well, but maybe that's a separate conversation to have one-on-one. I would point out, it might be useful for anybody who hasn't seen it. Let me just grab a copy of this thing on the screen. To take a look at that guidance document that the Security Council released recently. I'll put it on the screen here and we'll show it to you in a second, but it's great. So that's the requirement. You do have to handle your payment pages. But as I showed in that demonstration, this can affect any part of the web application. It doesn't matter if it's a payment page or it's something else. The attacker, if they're inside of the web application, can modify the web app to look and feel and do what they want it to. So they hit the homepage of your institution, they embed a thing that says give here and we'll match 100% if you give right now on our homepage, enter your card number, and then they got the card number. So there's compliance and there's security. In my opinion, if you want to actually secure your site, you should be looking at the whole thing. And then you're going to have to kind of speak with your QSA or make your own determination about if you're trying to keep the scope as narrow as possible. Along the way, I mentioned this thing. This is a document, if anyone hasn't seen it, that the Security Council developed over the last 3-6 months or so. And it's got all sorts of color and flavor about scope and implementations and potential solutions. So I'm just throwing that out there. It's on the Security Council's website. I wrote about 30 words in this 6,000-page document. So just wanted to plug that and see if anyone would find that interesting. But it's a good question. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, for
Here's
sure.
one. How do we... Oh, sure. You want to throw these out?
Oh, no, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Let's see. So there's been a revision to PCI DSS 4.0.1, which removed requirements 6.4.3 and added an eligibility requirements for merchants to confirm that their site is not susceptible. Would your tool address this revision? So I would politely offer a little bit of amendment there. So PCI 4.0.1 did not remove anything. Requirements 6.4.3 and 11.6.1 are still 1000% still in the DSS document, and you still have to comply with them. The change that's being discussed here is something to the self-attestation questionnaire A, the thing that you fill out if you're a merchant and you want to prove that you're being compliant. The change to the SAQ-A says that you either have to prove that you are using techniques such as those in 6.4.3 and 11.6.1 to assure that your site is not susceptible to script-based attacks, or that you need to ask your PSP that if you implement the PSP solution correctly, they're doing that. So I just want to be clear here. You still have to do those things. They're still in DSS. They have not been removed. What's been changed is the eligibility criteria. So if you can say my payment service provider assures me that my site is not susceptible to these attacks, if I use their thing correctly, which to my best of my knowledge, nobody does that right now. You still have to use techniques similar to those in 643 and 1161 to assure your website is not susceptible to attack. Now, nonetheless, would our tool address this revision? Yeah, we'll still cover you for any of that because like I said, the crux of the thing is you still have to do something to make sure your site is not susceptible. And that's at the root of what source defense does. So it's a great question. I didn't mean to lean too hard into that, but I think some folks I think some folks are going down the primrose path there a little bit of like, oh, they removed it, but they very much so did not. How do we know this tool is not harvesting the card numbers it is intended to protect? And also, what about the risk of this tool being compromised? Sure. So the question is, if we're embedded source defense or ScriptSafe is embedded in a web page, how are we not the problem that we intend to solve for and that kind of thing? We can prove technically, contractually, however you want, that we're not collecting PII of any kind. We don't. We don't collect any sensitive information. The only information we do collect is about the behavior of JavaScript as it executes within the web browser. But no IP addresses, no contents and form fields, and et cetera. So like I said, how do we prove that? Technically, I can prove it through our own certifications and et cetera, but it's not something that we do. What about the risk of this tool being compromised? What about the risk of the tool being compromised? There's techniques you can use when we are deployed. For instance, serving our code from your own CDN, wrapping our code in a hash and using that as being the only place where you're using SRI or need to use SRI. So there are techniques to make sure that our code isn't compromised. And then there's kind of like a follow-on to that of how can you run JavaScript in the same environment that you're meant to protect JavaScript from doing bad things? Like why can't an attacker simply remove our code? And it gets just a little bit technical, but the basic idea is that we run first. And because of how browsers work, that means we can set rules for other code that runs because we're the only thing that exists at the beginning of the universe of that page life cycle. So it's a very good question. I'm glad for it. What if an agency has a redirect to the Apple Store and Google Pay? Let's see. I'm going to assume that you're kind of talking about embedded payment techniques like Apple Pay, like Google Pay. The page the page from which those things are called most likely is still in scope. So if you've got a web page that says click here, use Apple Pay, I'd have to look at it from a technical standpoint. But if the card shows up and it's still a web page, then it's going to be in scope. Maybe another flavor or shade of that would be native phone applications. I think you were speaking more generally about web pages, but if anyone's curious, like a native iOS or Android app, if it's fully native and it's written in Objective-C or Go or whatever, and there's no web component of it, you don't have scope for 643 and 1161. You may have scope elsewhere. Don't get me wrong. DSS is like 400 pages long. But if it's a native app, it's not a web page, et cetera. However, one note there is that sometimes mobile apps are literally just wrappers around a web browser. And in that case, if it's a web view, then you have scope again. So it's a little case by case. That guidance document may be very useful in that case as well. Cost estimation for your tool from low end to high end for single average common website that's self-hosted by University Department. And it works with authorized.net. I would be remiss to get into like numbers on this call. I'm sorry if that's not like a super satisfying answer, but what I will say is that Source Defense has been here for a long time, and we've adjusted over time to make sure we can serve the needs of more modestly sized deployments, as well as all the way up to like a full institution-wide kind of thing and protecting every single page. So we recognize that there's going to be cases where you don't have a 6-figure budget or even a 5-figure budget to get something like this done, and we can find a solution that fits. Campus Guard and Source Defense are committed to make sure there's something for everybody in there. So that's what we've got open.
I do think there's another question here. What should we do if we suspect an e-skimming attack?
So great question. You should probably contact somebody like Source Defense or Campus Guard, or if you've got other resources at your disposal, a forensic investigator, et cetera. The most basic thing to start with, I guess, would be aggressively looking at your web application, getting somebody internally who's familiar with what your web pages should look like from a technical standpoint, asking them to go through the workflow of interacting with the web app and seeing if they recognize any suspicious files, or there's any files they don't recognize. But that that kind of analysis can be really, really tricky, because this code is often polymorphic. It'll change itself at execution. It'll remove itself from the document object model, the technical representation of the web page in the browser. So like hand analysis can be exceptionally time consuming and fruitless sometimes, unfortunately. The only way I've seen to do this and to get a definitive diagnosis and diagnostic of what's going on is to deploy something like us into the web pages in production, if you think it's a production problem, and then get the data. I'll give you an example. We were working with a PCI forensic investigator a few years ago. They had a customer who had the card brands reached out to this customer and said, hey, all these fraudulent transactions lead back to them being a common customer of yours. So we think there's something going on with your website. The PCFI spent a lot of time trying to find the attack and doing all sorts of fancy stuff. And they're exceptional experts in lots of areas of security, but this one was just under the radar. They installed us and we pinpointed the thing in like 10 minutes. So it's not so much, we're very good at what we do, but don't get me wrong, it's more like the right tool for the job. So if you think you have this problem, go get something that's specific for e-skimming. Don't just try to the other stuff's going to be ineffective just because it's kind of a novel, different problem. Get a tool made for the job is what I'm trying to say.
Okay. And along that same line then, are organizations, are they liable if there is an e-skimming attack on their website?
Good question. So I'm going to, first of all, dodge the question to say that I'm not a lawyer or an assessor. But the basic idea that I've heard from assessors is that if the card number got stolen because the person was interacting with your website, it's your problem, to sum it up. Like if it came into being because of choices you made or decisions you made, yes, it is. There's kind of I got this question a lot more at the beginning, 7 years ago or whatever. It was like, how is this my problem if some third-party vendor got popped? And then and unfortunately you're not responsible for it, but you are accountable for it. Like you have to make sure the code that's there that you have chosen in a way to put into those web pages and have be there is secure. So I'm going to artfully dodge the word liable there because I'm not a lawyer, but I am going to say that generally speaking, it's everybody's responsibility who provides a payment function or solicits payments to do that. Let's see, TouchNet redirect, is this tool a bit overkill? So the question here, to paraphrase, is if I have a redirect, do I need a tool like this? I would advise you, again, and maybe I'll put or maybe we'll follow up with that guidance document, but the redirect thing at this point, the guidance that the Security Council has given is that if the redirect is based on a script, so there's a bunch of ways to get a web browser to go somewhere else. One is to kind of have the server just tell it go somewhere else when you get here. One is to have the page instruct the browser to go somewhere else via JavaScript. If it's that second thing where the page automatically tells the browser to go somewhere else via JavaScript because a JavaScript instruction told it to, that script's in scope. Other cases where the server's telling it something or somebody's clicking a button, I don't believe there's scope there, but I would, again, I have to defer to your QSA. You'd have to ask them specifically what they want to do in your case is the idea. So.
I do have one more question. What departments, I know you mentioned web developers and things like that would be, diving into your web application and making sure that there aren't issues, but what other departments or people in the company, would be who you'd want to talk to or who would want to have this service?
Sure. So typically with whom I work, it generally starts in security, or these days it's inspired by GRC. Somebody who owns the PCI function is saying, hey, we got to get on this, and then security gets involved. There is often at least during testing or evaluation, a collaboration with application development. So those folks get involved to talk about stuff, but I want to stress that their involvement in a ScriptSafe deployment is super minimal. They got to copy and paste something, and then they can get back to the business of app dev. And on long-term care and feeding, those 5 hours per month, usually a collaboration between GRC and security. Security is doing the kind of day-to-day monitoring, and then GRC is asking for reports at the quarter or the year and doing that kind of stuff is what I have traditionally seen. I saw a thing in the chat about a link to the guidance document. I don't have a way to put things in the webinar chat. Maybe one of my co-hosts here has a way to do that. So I'm kind of taking the slightly janky way of just putting this browser out here. I just Googled this during the call, and I looked for PCI e-commerce guidance, and this was the second hit. So not the most elegant solution, but here we are. Oh, look, I can type an answer here.
All right.
Cool.
All right, do we have any other questions? All right.
So
All right, if you do have any questions later that you would like answered, just reach out to us at Campus Guard. You can send us a quick note on our website through Contact Us. We'd be happy to get your questions answered. I just wanted to thank Matt again for walking us through the platform, and to all of our attendees for participating in today's live demo. Just a quick reminder though, please do take a moment to fill out our quick survey that will launch immediately after the webinar has ended. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Thanks so much. Have a great day.